of rows in the second matrix, then yes, they can be multiplied. So one of the things I want you to get used to doing when you get a question like this is to recognize what kind of matrices that you are dealing with in the problem. So here we have a 2 by 2, which means we have 2 rows and 2 columns in the first matrix, and that's being multiplied by another matrix whose size is 2 by 3. So what this definitive statement is saying in here is if you write it out longhand, these 2 values, since these are rows and columns as well, these 2 values must be equal to one another if the answer to that, can these be multiplied, is yes or no. They'll give you a question where the first part of it might be, can they be multiplied? And the second part is, what is the answer? Or what's the result? So if the first answer is, no, they can't be multiplied, then the second answer would be, its operation is not defined. But in this particular case, what comes now is the second part of the problem. We also know that these numbers that are sitting out here have a byproduct as well. So this tells us what the size of the result is going to be, what kind of a result we're going to expect in the problem. So if these 2 matrices can be multiplied together, the result of this particular system is going to be a 2 by 3 matrix. When you see a question that asks you about can it be multiplied, I want you to think about what the size of the matrices are so that you can make an intelligent decision. Now, if they can be multiplied, and obviously the answer to this was yes, then they would expect us to physically go ahead and do the multiplication problem. So when you multiply, every row in a multiplication problem gets multiplied by every column. And I would suggest strongly that you build yourself a roadmap for these by writing down what the heck it is that you're going to multiply. Real simple. Every row is multiplied by every column. Row 1 has to be multiplied by column 1. Row 1 has to be multiplied by column 2. Row 1 has to be multiplied by column 3. Row 2 has to be multiplied by column 1. Row 2 has to be multiplied by column 2. And row 2 has to be multiplied by column 3. So if those are the multiplication problems I'm going to have, can you see that the result is going to have 2 rows and 3 columns? Now all you need to do is to identify what the ingredients are. And this is where people get screwed up because they can't transition, they can't make their mind and their fingers do 2 different things at the same time. Every row gets multiplied by every column, but no element is used more than once in that row column multiplication. So that means that the first element of row number 1 is going to be multiplied by the first element of row number 2. Or excuse me, of column number 1, excuse me. So that means that 2 times 4 has to be done. And I'm not done using row 1, so the second element of row 1 needs to be multiplied by the second element of column 1. That left to right movement on the rows must be accompanied with a top-down movement on the column before you're finished doing that part of the multiplication problem. So we're building the intermediate step that we need to see as support. In the workbook page, on the bottom question on each page, and on the test. Row 1 now has been finished multiplying by column 1. If there's more columns out there, then we keep transitioning across the rows and down the columns. The size of the matrix they give you is not going to be obnoxiously large. It'll probably be 2 by 2 or maybe 2 by 3. So you will have seen some of those before, and hopefully you will have practiced them correctly as well. Row 1 now needs to be multiplied by column 2. First element of row 1 needs to be multiplied by the first element of column 1. And if you have problems figuring out what's supposed to do, second element needs to be multiplied by something. All these little things that I do here are things that I've seen students do to help them keep track of where they need to go next. So first elements by first elements, rows, column, and second elements and second elements, rows, column. So we have a 1, 1 sitting here. Row 1, first element, 2, needs to be multiplied by something. Row 1, second element needs to be multiplied by something. And that would be the values here, 6 and -2. As we move across the rows, we must move down the columns. And that's a difficult operation because one of your hands is going this way and the other hand's going this way. And that's not easy for some people to be able to do because if you do it long enough, they're both going to start going the same way. So you have to be slow down a little bit and you got to be careful with that. Row 2 now is going to be multiplied by values. So I know I've got 6 that's going to be multiplied by something. And I know I have 1 that's going to be multiplied by something. First element of row 2, first element of column 1. Second element of row 2, second element of column 1. First element of row 2 times first element of column 2, which is a 1. Second element of row 2, which is a 1, by second element of column 2, which is also a 1. First element of row 2 and first element of column 3, second element of row 2, and second element of column 3. This is your middle step 2. This is a step that we refer to as your middle step and is at a bare bones minimum what I need to see for support. Additional support is not necessarily needed to see by hand because you already know what's going to happen with this result, correct? Don't you know that this result is going to have 2 rows and 3 columns? So shouldn't there be 6 cells you have to play fill in the blanks with? If they give you it already identified, it's easy because you know the rows and columns, but if you have to build the matrix yourself, there's where you need to have the rows and columns. Whether you choose to show me anything more in terms of intermediate steps or not is up to you. I don't necessarily need to see that you did 2 times 4 and got 8, and you did -2 times 3 and got a -6, but I do need to see that you got an end result of 2 for your upper left-hand cell. I don't necessarily need to see 2 times 1 is 2, and -2 times 1 is a -2, but I do need to see the result is going to be a 0. I don't necessarily need to see 12 and a +4, but I do need to see a 16. I don't need to see 24 and 3, but I do need to see 27. I don't need to see 6 and 1, but I do need to see 7. And I don't need to see 36 and a -2, but I do need to see 34. So these things that are in blue are optional things that you could put into your supplemental work in the exercise. But I know that you probably can do some of those things in your head, without needing to pick up a calculator. But if you got to pick up a calculator, I don't need to see what the results are, because now I can see this is what your plan was. Your plan was to do this. Did you execute your plan properly? That's going to be evident. If you didn't execute it properly, then I can at least see they intended to do this, but your arithmetic is faulty. So you get credit for some of the cells being correct if you made a simple mistake. But without the support, I don't know what the hell you multiplied. And that's what I need to see. So I'm telling you, don't shortchange me on these problems in the workbook, and don't shortchange me on these problems in the test. Because if the support's not there, it's wrong whether you got it right or not. I know good and well that you can plug this into the calculator and let the calculator do the work. That's not the purpose of the question. So be thorough with it. Be careful. Be organized. So I like these statements up here that I'm going to put in a different color. I like these things because for me, these help me identify what needs to be multiplied. I don't necessarily need to see element 1, element 2, element 3 types of things, but I do need to see you have a clear picture of where you're supposed to be taking your plan. Okay? So we think we're going to be able to accomplish that? It may take a little bit of practice, and you have adequate time to be able to practice on the homework exercises if you want. They don't say you have to do them by hand. They're expecting you to do them by hand. And if there's a help me solve this, they're probably not telling you to put it into the calculator. They're probably telling you how to multiply it by hand. But we only expect you to be able to do that once. Okay? So what we should start today is then dealing with this operation process of coding. So